Hi everyone, this is our lecture on coastal systems and beaches. Now these beaches and coastal areas are an important part of coastal areas such as the New England coast here as the West Coast and many other countries that have oceans and seas as their borders. Uh, this is an example of the Louisiana flooding that occurred in August 2016. Uh, if there's intense rainstorm or hurricane, sometimes the coastal areas and as well as coastal streams and rivers can be flooded when the waters fill up the stream channel. So you can see here a lot of the economic damage that was caused by this flooding in Louisiana in August 2016, along with several bits. So you can see how coastal areas and hurricanes and extreme meteorological events can cause significant damage to the economy, to as well as deaths. This is another example from Hurricane Sandy here. As you can see, the pre-hurricane and then the post-hurricane damage caused by Sandy. Parts of the highway being submerged, the water bringing sand inside these residential areas here, houses being damaged. So Hurricane Sandy was one of the most uh, damaging economically um, disaster in our more recent history that ravaged New Jersey and other coastal areas here along our eastern seaboard. Now, some of the terms that we hear in when you study beaches, one is called longshore transport. This is the mechanism by which waves approach the beach. Usually, the longshore current moves parallel to the direction of the beaches, and as it moves and it ebbs and flows, it deposits the sand particles. So one thing that we have to be careful is whether there's any barriers or any constructions along the coastal areas that impede this longshore current. Now, what are the different types of coastal management and adaptations? Uh, Several ways we can adapt or manage. One is called accommodate. So let's say in the future the sea level is rising along with extreme storms. Um, what we can do is basically we don't really do anything. We just accommodate and live with this sort of scenario. Second is called protect or engineer it. In the case of future sea level rise and extreme storms, if the sea level is rising, we can build barriers and protect our residential areas, protect our homes along the coastal areas. The third one is natural protection. In the case of these extreme scenarios in the future, which are very likely, we can have a more natural managed techniques by planting this vegetation along the coastal areas that can potentially slow the growth of this, slow the energy from these tides and storms. And lastly, we can have something called a retreat. The last option would be basically move any physical structures we have and physically move it higher up ground so that the extreme storms and tides along with the sea level doesn't affect it as much. Now, one of the techniques that I mentioned is called the soft engineering technique. Um, One is called beach renourishment. It's basically a process of basically dumping sand from elsewhere onto a shoreline or a coastal area that has been eroding to basically create a new beach or basically widen the existing beach. So for instance, here we have a coastal beach here, and we're basically putting a lot of sand on this area here to widen the beach here. And this is regularly done along most of the major beaches in the US. So basically, it's a plug for the coastal erosion. It's not a permanent fix. It does not stop erosion. It simply gives uh, the erosional forces from the sea, from the ocean and from the waves, basically to chew on this extra sand for a while. So it's not a permanent fix. We can also talk about beach stabilization. Usually, you'll see dunes being restored and protected. There's usually marshland that's been created to basically protect or reduce the power of the waves that come crashing on the shore. So these are more soft and engineering or natural techniques. Another technique is called the hard stabilization. In this technique, we are basically building structures or constructions to decrease coastal erosion. Um, Sometimes and often this results in unwanted outcomes because instead of actually impeding the wave energy, it actually creates more erosion. Various types of structures we can see: seawall, groins, breakwater, and jetties. We'll go through one by one in the next slides. Groins, you'll see a lot of groins built along the coast, particularly in residential areas where they're trying to protect their beaches. You'll see these groins jutting out, and because of this construction, you can see that the deposition of the sand along the beaches changes, whereas the other side of the groin gets eroded. So these are the examples of the groins here. Another one is called jetties, where you'll see that these are usually made for boat access in the coastal areas. Again, these are hard construction, but again they lead to deposition on one side and the erosion on one side based on the longshore transport of the waves. A breakwater, this is also created to protect coastal areas. You might have seen in many coastal towns here. Again, these are hard physical constructions, and again they pose a barrier to the direction of the longshore transport. Even though they are protecting this harbor here, they do change the dynamics of the longshore transport and the deposition of sand along this area here. And finally, seawall. You'll see a lot of these seawalls being constructed, hard physical walls, basically to protect these coastal houses, coastal properties. And what they eventually do is actually, instead of protecting in the long run, they're actually eroding the beach from underneath. So in some instances, and often, it actually creates more harm than it actually protects. So again, we have to be very careful with these hard engineering techniques. So again, this is the big question, whether should we accommodate or manage, or should we basically physically move our infrastructure. And again, in big cities like Miami, a retreat is almost impossible when you have a big infrastructure, big buildings right along the coast. So again, this is a big question for a lot of coastal towns and cities. There's again the questions of economic cost of this management. State of Delaware had this study done where they said that if you really wanted to retreat from the beach, the cost would be about $291 million for the 2000 to 2050 time period. Whereas if they just keep renourishing the beach, adding more sand, the cost is only about $60 million. So again, you can see the economic dilemma here in coastal retreat versus coastal management. Some places like New York City, which is one of the biggest metropolitan cities, they certainly have taken a stance of no retreat. Mayor Bloomberg has said that we cannot and will not abandon our waterfront. It's one of the greatest assets. We must protect it, not retreat from it. So again, there are certainly hard stances from a lot of these big cities. So again, you'll answer a couple of these things in your assignment about this beach renourishment debate, whether we should put more money in replenishing this beach renourishment of these beaches, or what is the alternative solution, right? So yeah, that concludes this small segment on beach renourishment.